Cool, yeah. So thanks, guys, for coming. Today is a talk about data and microdata, and just, I guess the ultimate idea is just to really communicate why this is a really good idea, why we should do it in government, and then a little bit into the application of both how to go about doing it and a quick demo at the end about how to do that in Drupal 8. But I guess the sort of core of it is just sort of explaining a bit of what microdata is and how you can use it in government. As we sort of get started, just a quick info about myself. So I've been working 10 years in the web industry, originally as a software developer, onto solution architect, and today I work for Acquia as a technical account manager. That role involves me being a digital strategist and technical enabler on our platform, but it ultimately is a focus on customer success in the digital space. I've been a part of the GovCMS sort of program and the community now for since its inception, so going on almost 2 years. Okay, so data and microdata. I guess to really understand what microdata is all about, we kind of need to understand the whole reason why it was conceived in the first place, and bringing that back to a context in government, right? So I guess the ultimate goal in government is really about reaching people and help governing those people. And so as a government, we want to reach out to those people and tell them the information about what the agency is actually doing, or what the government's doing for them, what services they have available to them. And it's about reaching them to tell them that, right? And there's various forms of communication that are needed to do that. The reality is, though, that this diagram is not so simple. In fact, it's actually very complex. For starters, people are using lots more devices today. So where people have phones, mobile, tablets, laptops, or workstations, and they use them different times of the day. They use them for different reasons. It gets a little bit more complex than that as well, because the government produces a lot of different websites today. So we have to create multiple websites. We have to make them available to different devices. And in fact, it's the people that go to the websites. It's not the websites that go to the people. And it gets a little bit more complex than that, because actually the people don't go to the websites. They go to other things that they can rely on and use quite regularly for all number of things, right? So they'll use the search engine. They might use social networks, or people will share links and people will click on links through those avenues. And there's a lot of communication that goes on good old-fashioned email and chat clients as well. So really this diagram doesn't work at all. It's not actually government that reach people. It's completely the other way around. Right now it's people reaching out to the government to find out how things work. And it's actually a really hard that direction of flow of information gathering is actually really hard to be successful about, because it's going in the wrong way. How can you really know that you're targeting the information you need to reaching all the people that need to receive that information if you rely on them to come and get it? And so we kind of get into the need for a better approach, especially in the form of technology. And it kind of breaks down a bit to language, and that's how we communicate, right? But if we look at this more complex diagram, and this is kind of like a communication workflow diagram of how we communicate today across the web. While we speak in English, right, to each other, and we can communicate in that manner, the communication is actually facilitated by computers. And we kind of have, English going in from the people. We have the government providing content in English, but then there's this whole network of computers between us that actually don't understand English. They understand data. They just communicate data to one another, and as sort of something gets lost in translation as they start to communicate the data from one endpoint to the other, especially when you think about that middle tier, right? That middle tier of search, social network, and mail is just a generic tier that's designed to share data, but doesn't really provide any semantics around it. And you have this is the language, right, that layer speaks. So HTML, XML, JSON are usually the most common web form platform languages at the moment that these three layers communicate across. So my phone, when I load up a website on that, it understands HTML, it can render that. Your search engines, they crawl HTML, they can understand that. And the government produce websites in HTML, and everything that connects understands that. That's what that means. But the problem is semantics get lost in translation. So I thought of this as the nice analogy for it, right? Is that you tell the computer one thing and it kind of thinks of it in a literal sense, but it doesn't quite get the nuances and the culture of a language. They kind of get missed a little bit. So it kind of creates a problem for us, right? Because this whole layer here, this one here, is our form of communication, but things are getting lost in that translation. So the way that the government ends up delivering data to the people is perhaps not in the most ideal format. And so let's have a look at what that problem looks like today. I just picked, in sort of preparing for this presentation, I grabbed the Parliament website, picked a random MP and picked out their page, and took a look at the HTML data that's underneath it. So one part of that web page, there's the postal address. Right now, this is a very small and specific example, but it's across the entire site, right? Now, if we look at the HTML inside of that little example of their postal address, we have this black snippet here. So they've got p tags in HTML. That's a paragraph tag, so telling the web browser that this is a paragraph. That U bracket here is an underline, so you can see on the right-hand side, the postal address title is underlined. And then these BR things mean break. So you're breaking down to a new line in a paragraph. Now, as the computer reads that, they just said that that's a paragraph and there is something that's underlined. Okay, maybe that has a meaning of importance to it. And there are some breaks that break the words up in that paragraph. It doesn't actually understand that that really is a postal address. However, when we look at it on screen, we can see that that resembles a format that you might write down on an envelope or something like that. And we, from our experiences as being humans, can understand that that's a PO box and that that is an address to be used for sending something. But of course, a computer, in the way that it understands it, sees this kind of structure all over the internet and can't compare that from an actual paragraph, which might be, out of a book or a novel or something like that. It completely loses semantic meaning. So what that kind of means in reality is that it can't, especially in that layer of, the middle layer of, search engine, social media, they can't pull this piece of information out and provide it to the end user in a very helpful way because it simply doesn't know that information could help the user. And so a number of years ago, Google came together with a number of other parties, and they developed something called schema.org. And this was kind of, the attempt as a solution to that. Google, and I guess being the largest English search bot in the world, it would crawl all this information, and it knew that it could derive more meaning out of the data that it was indexing, but didn't really have the means to truly understand that data. And so it devised a schema that anyone could use, and if they were to implement the schema on their website, then Google would be able to do more interesting things with their search engine. Today, schema.org is a continuing, growing schema, so they have version releases. This is a diagram that shows the growth of schema.org in terms of its entities that it supports. So on the left-hand side here, you can see, right-hand side, the key to the different entities, so person, organization, place, creative work. These are different types of entities that you can describe something on the web, and they've basically looked at everything that they possibly can and tried to genericize that as much as possible, so you've got a very base level of entities. And then on top of that, they have more specific use cases. So for example, organization is a type of entity, but on top of that, government organization is a subset, and it has additional properties on top of that that are only applicable to government organizations and not applicable to others. Google are not the only people who have contributed to this. I think Yandex is a Russian search box, has also been a huge contributor, and as such, there are properties and attributes a part of this schema that are also only specific to certain countries. Of course, it's an open standard and more people are more than welcome to contribute to it. It's a project managed on GitHub, and so people can say, well, we need more metadata that can help us in other ways, and you can submit kind of suggestions to it, or they might sort of tell you to use another kind of property for it. This is being used, schema.org is being used in a massive way across all of the internet at the moment. So we're seeing it being used by obviously Google and by Yandex, the Russian search engine, but also by social networks, and we're also starting to see some browsers starting to utilize some of this information too. So to go back to the original example and how this will kind of look, we could start looking at this page and identifying how certain elements of this page could really be translated into schema.org principles. So here I've kind of annotated on the screenshot here different examples using a syntax of the entity name, the colon, and then the entity property that could represent. So some very simplistic ones here, but obviously the person's name, job title, who they work for, the organizational address, the government organization address, the person who they work for, their URL. There's a lot when you look at that information and you can say, well, this is what that property means, or this is what that piece of string means. There's essentially a schema.org equivalent that you can map to. And then underneath the presentation layer inside of the HTML, you're going to provide that information to them. So previously to the example that I gave earlier of HTML, this one is obviously quite a lot more complex. In an age now where content management systems are really reigning supreme in this space, and HTML is seldomly something that is manually composed. This is not such a scary proposition because a lot of the content management systems can do this for you. But this will be kind of what it looks like. So the content itself is not really all that different. There's just a lot more going on in the attributes of an HTML element. We're defining that we're using the schema vocab. This, by the way, so I forgot to mention, there are a number of different, I think 3 that I can think of at least, standards for describing schema.org data. Microdata is one format. The one that Drupal uses is actually called RDFA, and they're essentially the same thing. They're just described in slightly different ways in the HTML. So for the purposes of this talk, I'm not going to go into the depth of that. And I guess for the sort of the end point is that most engines support both formats. It's not a real issue. But yes, it's using the vocab of schema.org, looking at the type of person, and then it goes underneath there, and it's using a hierarchy of HTML to help describe what entities are inside of that schema. What that kind of looks like in a more visual aspect is you start to get this tree-like definition of data, and that's kind of, you could think of how an engine might be able to look at that and see that tree of information and pull from it what they need to. In other words, you're kind of starting to describe relational databases inside of HTML page, right? You're able to describe a portion of information that people really care about in the structured data. It's quite nice. So some of the use cases, I'm actually from New Zealand, but I was thinking about how I could show some examples of things like, what sort of Australian actor maybe might be able to, everyone could resonate with at the talk. So I picked Hugh Jackman. You must all know him. So when you write Hugh Jackman into your search, Google search, right? This is pretty standard. People will see this all the time now. Is that on the right-hand side, there's this big thing of information, and you can see there that there are images. You've got information like when he's born and stuff. You've got some profiles, so social media links, and some movies. Google didn't actually find all of that information. It was like, let's get a team together and write this bio so that when someone types in Hugh Jackman, something comes up, right? They didn't do that. Instead, they relied on microdata to tell them that information. So they said, well, for an actor, maybe we can show this kind of template, right? And if that information is available, we'll just present it to that person. And so when they go crawling about the place, somewhere on the internet, they're going to say that that is a person, but not just any kind of person. They're going to say it's like an actor person. And they're going to provide a bunch of information. They would pull that all together, and then they would present that on the side. So because microdata is being used, Google can do this kind of stuff. And that makes your lives better, because now you don't have to click on a link to find out a portion of what Hugh Jackman's all about. Instead, you can, they're kind of summarizing multiple search results here on the side, and you don't have to go any further than that. So, you just save 30 to 40 seconds of your life. Another use case, I started using another Google product called Google Inbox, and as part of my job, I do a bit of travel. So every time I have to go somewhere, I'll go online, I'll book a air flight, I'll go and book a hotel, and get all these confirmation emails of things that I've booked and purchased. Google Inbox actually understands this. There's microdata inside of the emails that will tells them when things are happening, like when the flights are going out. It actually knows about every flight path in the world. It knows about a lot of the hotels that I'm going to, because it's mapped them in other places. And so it knows that I'm going to a trip somewhere, and it summarizes all of that for me. So now I use my inbox to give me an itinerary for my travel plans, just something that I would have never thought an email client to do. But they're starting to sort of revolutionize the email client in that way, and it's super helpful for me. The other one, another use case, is microdata in Facebook. So you guys probably may or may not have done this before. Grab the URL out of a web page and then gone to share it on Facebook. Facebook will see that that's a URL, and it'll go and visit the page that you just, in the background, it'll go and visit the page that you just requested or we're about to share. And it'll look for microdata and see if there is enough available to provide a better insight to that link. And so here I pasted a YouTube link, and it found a thumbnail, a title, and a description of what that YouTube video is. So YouTube at the moment is producing a bunch of microdata, and it's good enough for Facebook to produce that kind of summary. And so now my Facebook post would just get a bit fatter and a bit more visual and a bit more appealing for perhaps some of my friends to click on that trailer. So now you can kind of see that with the use of microdata, the tide of the information begins to change a little bit, because you can start playing in the court of your users, right? The things that they actually like connecting with. So rather than having to worry about building necessarily a platform that works really well for mobile, if you have this good microdata inside of your platform, then you can share that on, say, Facebook, and know that Facebook are providing a really good platform for mobile, and so your data is still getting reached to that level. Right now, I think the use cases of microdata are still really small because there's not enough people that are really adopting it. I think schema.org reports that only about 1,000 domains in the world are currently using the government organization namespace. So you think about the amount of governments there are around, there's clearly a very small amount of usage today, and there's opportunity for a lot more to be used. And ultimately it comes down to structured data, I think, is the key. The better that you can describe the data that you have, the easier this job becomes. Obviously you could look for schema.org support in like a WYSIWYG editor, but I think that ultimately content editors are going to find that really challenging to have to provide semantic meaning to everything that they do. So the better that you can structure that data for the content editors to import or to compose into, the easier this job is going to become. So think about the example of the MP I gave earlier. All of those fields that were provided were probably fields inside of a CMS, and if that CMS had tracked, or mapped that data to the schema.org appropriate entity, then that stuff would all be inherent, and the content editors would have known none the wiser. So let's look briefly at how to do this with Drupal. Inside of Drupal today, there are a couple of options. If you're using Drupal 7, you've got the schema.org module, which you can turn on. RDFA is actually available in Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 and has been since 2011 when Drupal 7 came out. But the schema.org modules really provided the UI to enable that capability. Microdata is another alternative. As I mentioned, RDFA is in Drupal 7. Microdata is a slightly separate schema, in terms of how it's written in XML, and you can use that alternatively. Schema.org has the better of the two integration, and also there's some good documentation on there on how to utilize other things. So for example, if you're using commerce with Drupal, there are Drupal commerce modules that help do this as well. In Drupal 8, a lot of schema.org was migrated into Drupal 8 and as a part of core, and so that module no longer exists for Drupal 8. However, the user interface was not. So RDF UI was then built in the contrib space and is now available today for us to use. So I wanted to give you guys a sort of a short demo of that, and by short I do mean it's pretty short. Okay. So here is just a really stock standard version of Drupal 8. It's really quite hard to see this way. Let me see if I can mirror the screens. Okay. Great. Okay, cool. So this is my really basic demo. If you're familiar with Drupal, you'll have the structure menu underneath there is content types. That's pretty much the same between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8. So this is Drupal 8, by the way. And I've got my two basic content types that come out of the box with Drupal, an article and a basic page. And nothing too different here, right? Firstly, I'll go to edit my article and show that underneath these settings here are schema.org mappings, and I can choose which schema I want this content type to belong to. So I'm aligning a Drupal content type one-to-one with a schema.org entity. And there are a lot to choose from here. Lists are quite long, so at the top it's got the very basic things. So everything extends from a thing, and then it goes into a more detailed description of that. So an article is a descendant of a thing, if that makes sense, and everything goes that way. So as you go down the list, you'll see here that things are more and more detailed, and there is a very, very diverse set of options. So it would probably take you, if you're going to go back and implement some of this stuff, definitely worth spending 20 minutes just looking around and familiarizing yourself with the schemas that are available, so that you can think, oh, I can use that in that kind of context. Ultimately, if you can't quite see something you want to describe, it doesn't look like it's described very well in schema.org, you could always just use the thing, but ultimately there are a lot of different types, in this case article. So that's already set up for me. If I switch over to the Manage Fields section, there is this RDF mappings capability. You can see that I've got these fields called body, comments, image, and tags. So these are fields on my Drupal entity. So switching over to RDF mappings, I can map those fields to specific RDFA mappings based on the schema. So again, they're just choosing which ones are available. Again, there's many, and unfortunately I don't have a lot of time to sort of go through and explain this, and I want to leave you guys to hopefully want to go and explore this yourself. But you can, when you install this module, it actually sets up the article and basic page for you, so there's nothing really too much you want to do there. However, if you do want to go a bit deeper into it, you can actually add a content type directly from schema.org. This is a really cool thing, a submodule in here called RDF Builder. And you can select something, so let's say government organization, hit next, and it will grab all of the properties available on that government organization, which there are quite a few. And I can say, yeah, I want to create an entire schema.org entity inside of Drupal, hit save. Now these are all text plain. I'm not sort of going into too much detail here for be able to create it, but now I just created a content type in Drupal that is exactly the same as a schema.org entity for a government organization. So now I can go and create that kind of piece of content in Drupal, and when Drupal publishes that piece of information, it's going to display all of that nice microdata inside of underneath in the HTML for you, and you don't have to worry anything about that. So just to kind of show that off, add content, add a government organization. Oh, doesn't have a lot of that stuff there. Okay. So that's a really powerful tool that's now coming out of Drupal. This is, of course, Drupal 8. Drupal 8 was released late last year. It's currently in 8.003. This module's also still kind of emerging in itself. But one other thing I wanted to show you before we sort of round up for questions is the microdata actually working in action. So here I have a little extension that I found in Chrome that shows microdata and how it's being used on the page. So this is a way that you can validate that the microdata is coming through and it's available for search bots or Facebook or whatever to be able to grab this piece of information. So I just click that extension and it goes and has already crawled the HTML and it's found this information here. So you can see that it's found a attribute type of schema article, and here's the summary of the title of that, and here's some text around that. I just pulled a news article off of Creative Commons. It's also got a reference to the image that it's available to. So if I was to publish that and share that on Facebook, there's a pretty good chance Facebook will be able to pull out that information and display it. And I haven't really had to do anything, but now it's reaching people a lot more effectively than just having published the page and using raw HTML. Unfortunately, that's all the time that I've got. Was there any quick questions I could answer?
You identified any sort of good candidate content types that this would be useful for? Imagine events, things that get that way.
Yeah, I mean, the way that the schema is built, it's designed to work for anything that you can think of describing on the web. So there's a creative work, for example, if you're just wanting to express some music, or if you want to write a piece of information or whatever. But yeah, events, articles are some of the more broader terms that are being used in a more generic sense. I think right now there's not enough. It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem where it's can government provide enough microdata that can be used in really creative ways. In the keynote from Tom Burden earlier, he was talking about a services layer that government provides, and this can be one of them, where providers can crawl government websites and produce some really useful information out of them if we gave them the tools to be able to do that. Cool. Well, no other questions? Thank you all very much for attending.